This is the second of our Ancaster Music Society podcasts. And today we're actually in the Ancaster Memorial Arts Centre on the mezzanine level, surrounded by all this beautiful artwork. We're up to our fourth concert of the series. And I have with me today the musician who is going to be our March 14th musician. We are just delighted to have him here with us. It's rare, I think, that we are able to hear the virtuoso violinist Steve Sitarski playing solo, because as most of you know, most of people in Ontario know, he is the concertmaster of the Hamilton Philharmonic Orchestra, and renowned for that. But he is also a great teacher. He teaches at Wilfrid Laurier. He teaches at the Glenn Gould Studio in Toronto. And he's now going to play solo for us on March 14th. So welcome, Steve.
Great to be here.
Nice to have you here.
Thanks.
Steve is a very interesting person in that I think that probably he's known for many, many years what he was going to do as a career. He's a career musician. Steve, when did you start knowing that this was going to be your job for life?
It's a hard question to answer because some of my friends and colleagues have said when they were kids, they watched Sesame Street or something and Itzhak Perlman came on and they heard him play and they loved his bubbly personality and they remembered telling their parents, I want to do that. I want to get me one of those. And I didn't really have that kind of moment. But I started on the violin, as I'm told, some time before the age of 5. And I showed some promise. And my parents are not professional musicians, so they were kind of groping around trying to find good teachers. And I eventually got to a point where I started playing in little violin competitions and festivals and was successful. And when I was an early teen, I started studying with a teacher who was based in the Russian school of violin teaching. And there's a lot more discipline and a lot more sort of ambition in terms of how to build the career. And I suppose that he was somewhat influential in getting that mindset, because you really have to be focused on perfecting your skills.
Where were you living at the time?
So I was born in Oakville, so in the area, and he was teaching in the Toronto area, so it wasn't that far to travel for that.
So all through school you were playing?
Right. So in addition to my normal school where I learned math and physics and reading and all that, I would have my lessons on the side. And like most young people who study music, it's there are very few schools where you can sort of take that as part of your school career.
Yes, there are. One of my daughters went to Etobicoke because she wanted to do musical theatre, but it was hard to get in. You had to have certain marks and so on, and your academic studies had to be good. But there aren't too many, I think, here. There are quite a few more in Europe and the UK.
Yeah.
But here not so much. So then you left school and went to an academy or conservatory? What did you do?
Well, because my parents wanted me to also get a regular education, I didn't end up going to a university. I went to University of Toronto, and I went into the program where you actually get a degree in music and not just a diploma or something like that, like what you would get from an academy or a conservatory. And of course, as part of that university degree, I had to study, some non-musical things, which is considered, important to rounding out your
personality,
education and your personality and your interests. And I don't regret that, except that, when you go to university to get a real degree, you have a little less time to practice and focus on honing your skills. Whereas if you go to a music academy or specific conservatory type situation, it's really quite focused on the practical aspects of becoming a performer.
Absolutely.
So
absolutely.
So there's sort of give and take.
So were you working towards becoming a performer, or were you thinking of teaching, or?
I think performing was always the
Was the
first
thing,
priority.
yes. Yeah.
There aren't, I'm going to say there aren't that many, but it's a little less common for a young person to go professionally into music with the idea that I'm just going to be a teacher. It's something that kind of happens a little
When you're there, yes.
ways along, once you become successful as a performer, and then you kind of can, first of all, you've got credibility, and then you feel like you have something to offer people.
Well, you say that, but I think not always are performers great teachers, and vice versa.
Oh, that's true. And part of the problem is that some of the most talented performers have come to their skills kind of naturally. They're just very talented at doing what they do. And, you ask them to explain something and they almost have to take their instrument and demonstrate because they can't, they've never had to figure out how to explain what they do. They just do it. And of course, personality wise, not everyone has the patience to be a teacher. Again, if you're a professional, you're used to doing at a high level all the time. And then someone comes to you and is struggling with something. You have to be very patient and really understand what the issue is. And there's a lot of psychology involved in terms of not overwhelming the student with too much information or putting too much pressure to get it right away. But if you coddle them and don't push them, then
nothing happens.
They don't get the work done. And so
so it's a learning experience, just like performing, isn't it? Teaching.
I think for most people, and again, there are always going to be natural teachers who just seem to have a knack for immediately connecting with each individual student. But yeah, I think most performers who become teachers have to kind of hone that as a skill as well.
Yeah. What sort of play?
It's funny. It reminds me of Nathan Milstein, a great Russian violinist, was being interviewed by somebody, and they asked the same question. And I don't know whether he misunderstood the question or whether he was deliberately trying to be funny, but he said a wood violin. So I've always played wood violins.
That's good to know.
But even that, there was a sort of a phase or a craze or something that happened way back in the 1980s where they started coming out with aluminum violins. And we're doing these tests to see whether people could distinguish between
an aluminum
violin and a wood violin. And it sounds like the aluminum violin would be terrible, but believe it or not, it didn't sound that bad.
Really?
Yeah. And
you have got the tone and the sort of, isn't there sort of an acoustic quality to a wood violin?
I mean, I hope I could tell the difference if you
don't know.
Put me to the test. But so there was that, and then there was another fad that started that hasn't really calmed down, and that's the carbon fiber instruments now, and they're sounding okay. And they're the sort of instruments that you can take outside and play if the sun's shining on them. You don't have to worry about the wood suffering from that, and they can get a little bit wet or damp, and you just wipe them off, and it doesn't matter. And so that's another option.
But the difference between, say, a Stradivarius and a carbon fiber violin, would the audience know, or would only the person playing?
Well, that's an interesting question, isn't it? I mean, we've kind of conditioned ourselves into just assuming that these old, great Italian violins are naturally better. They have to be better because and many of them are extraordinary instruments. And I don't think that you could ever reproduce the sound of a great old Italian violin with carbon fiber or metal or some sort of hybrid material.
No. Maybe it's like the we've talked about this before, but I know that Valerie always says that with the old Steinways, there's a ghost in the piano. Maybe there's a ghost in the violin too.
I think an instrument is definitely going to be affected by all the people who performed on it over the years. But there's another aspect that we forget is not for my concert here at the Ancaster Center, but for if you're listening to recordings of people, the electronics that are available to enhance and filter and change and fix the sound is so sophisticated now that any recording you hear that isn't guaranteed live, unedited,
Yes.
You can be almost sure that something has been done to make it sound better.
Perfect.
And so when you say, well,
that's a bit
great
sad,
old Italian violin, well, maybe someone is in the recording studio with a cheap instrument,
yes,
and then they run it through some filters and add all sorts of qualities to it that make it sound closer to that.
So only when you're actually playing live
Right.
does that become an issue.
Yeah, and
Yes.
and if I may go further with this
Yes,
idea, it's really put a lot more pressure on performing artists, because people are able now, to listen to recordings and watch videos that have been heavily edited, and they sound perfect, and it sounds like, well, you're never going to play out of tune, you're never going to make a mistake, and then you get into a live performance where anything can happen, and you make a mistake and people get disappointed. Well, come on, what's going on?
Well, I know that for a long time on LPs, they would actually put on the LP recorded live, and that was a good thing. It was something that people wanted to collect, those live performances, because of the fact that they might not have been absolutely perfect. But now I guess everyone wants everything perfect.
Well, a few years ago, I bought a recording of the great Japanese violinist Midori performing the Tchaikovsky violin concerto with, I think that was the Berlin Philharmonic, and I was looking forward to this probably being a very significant recording, and it said recorded live, but then you flip it over on the back, and then it says recorded live, and it lists 5 evenings. So they recorded it live 5 times, and then if there was a little glitch here or there, they could pick something from one of the other evenings and splice it in.
I'm sure they used to do that a lot.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. What a shame. It is a shame, I think, because those little glitches are part of life.
Proof that we're human. I mean,
it really is, isn't it? I know. You were telling me earlier before we turned the mic on about your change of technique because of an injury. Could you elaborate on that? Because I'm sure people would be most interested in that.
Sure. So I think most serious professional, certainly classical musicians who have been performing a heavy schedule for decades, as I had, are all going to have little aches and pains and things, and little injuries here and there. But shortly after the COVID-19 pandemic shut down the performing industry, I noticed that I was starting to have some pain in my left shoulder, and it was persistent, and it just kept getting worse little by little, and it was months and months of dealing with this, and I finally was able to get it diagnosed, because I thought, well, I'll do things that avoid the pain, which is natural. That's what you would think is a natural thing. And it turned out that it was an ailment called frozen shoulder. I don't know what the medical term is. Frozen
Everyone
shoulder.
knows what that is.
And, I could barely raise my arm. It was just excruciatingly painful. And unfortunately, the person who diagnosed it said, this is a very painful injury. And unfortunately, the rehabilitation is even more painful, because you have to stretch into the pain in order to break up the scar tissue that's
causing
the freezing. But luckily I stuck with it, and after about a month of painful rehabilitation, I did end up improving, and to the point now where I don't think there's any residual issue for it.
Can you hear it cracking?
Sometimes.
Yes.
Yeah, sometimes I can still. So I guess there's a little bit of something
there
that's still in there, but crap.
But you had to change everything
Right.
the way you play.
Interestingly, as painful as this was and as disappointing as it was, we weren't performing, and there was no end in sight to this pandemic. At that time, they still didn't know really what it was and how it was transmitted and how severe and there was no antidote for it, no vaccine. And so I was facing months and months and months of likely inactivity. And so inside of me, I thought, well, for whatever reason this happened, I'm kind of being given an opportunity with COVID to reset my arm. I put a different chin rest because I had a chin rest that sort of put my neck and shoulder in a certain position, and it was maybe less natural. So I found something that was more natural, and I was able to, I wasn't happy with the way my wrist was, so I was able to do that. But you have to realize, after almost 50 years of playing a certain way, and being under pressure and having things thrown at you at the last minute, the last thing you want to think about is
Changing
doing
it.
with your technique.
Mm-hmm.
And so it took, I literally sat in front of a mirror for months, hours, every day, just playing slow scales and watching myself and listening. Because, when you play a certain way, whether it's correct or not, or whether it's efficient or not, it feels right.
Yes.
Because you're just used to it.
Yes.
If you
Yes.
walk a certain way, and then
Yes.
you try to change the way you
Yes.
walk,
It's
it's going to
odd.
feel strange, right?
Mhm.
And so it was the same thing.
Mhm.
And of course, if you spend 50 odd years learning how to do something, to unlearn it or to relearn or change, you can't just think is going to take
Yeah.
a couple of
It
days.
takes a long time for the brain to adjust.
So all the brain, all the neural pathways, and all the instinctive
Yeah.
and intuitive,
Yeah.
thoughts that you have
Yes.
in the moment, and I have to now kind of dampen those and refocus, in a completely different direction. And there's always a silver lining. Of course, it was really difficult at first, and it felt really strange and wrong. But the silver lining was that, in fact, what I suspected would improve has improved.
Oh, really?
And it's forced me to, as I was saying to you earlier, the same music that I play, that I played for many, many years, I now have to come to with a very fresh outlook, because I can't just, okay, I'm that piece again, automatic pilot, play
No.
it, because I have to think about this new setup and different fingerings and different way I'm using my bow. And so even though it's a lot more work, in a way, it's
The musical result is better.
even more fulfilling in a way, because it really forces me to then analyze the music and how I feel about it and how I think it should work, and what works best.
Very,
So it is it was
very interesting.
very interesting,
And
and
you said you're still doing it.
it's a constant
It's constant.
process.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't think it'll ever stop.
No.
Um,
Do you ever slip back into that old?
Well, I'm sure I do, because, of course, since we've come back to performing over the last couple of years, I'm back to a fairly heavy performing schedule, and with, limited practice time, and
Yes.
and things happen, and there's stress involved, and what does the body do when there's stress? It naturally reflects back to what it feels
Automatic.
comfortable
Yeah.
doing. And here I am forcing myself to do something that doesn't feel comfortable
Yes.
in the heat of the moment.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
so
that's
that's been a
hard.
bit of a challenge over the years. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. Very good. How long have you been with the HPO, Stephen?
I think I started in 2012. So this would be my 12th season, but a couple of COVID seasons in the middle there.
Right.
So,
Right.
we're all kind of, it's going to sort of skew the count for a lot of these things. Yeah.
And tell me what the difference is between being the team leader of something like an orchestra and playing solo. Is the stress level the same, or can you sort of pass off some of the stress to the rest of the orchestra and not any other concertmaster?
Well, you'd probably get a different answer from different concertmasters, because it's not a role that's, I think, defined in a very concrete way. some concertmasters really do see themselves as, the leader, as, the British term for concertmaster is the leader. And they see themselves as a leader, and they just expect people to follow
I see.
whatever they do.
Yes.
And that doesn't always produce the best results. Often, in a difficult situation where the orchestra might, come apart or something, you need someone to just lay it down, and everyone follows that person. So in that sense, that sort of attitude is useful. But most of the time, in my opinion, the concertmaster's role is an enabler role. It's a conduit between the conductor and the musicians, but it's also finding out how to get people to play at their best and at their most comfortable. And I can be very helpful in that role. Now, if I'm just like, do it like this,
Yes.
and people aren't comfortable doing it like that, then I'm forcing people into a situation that is not going to get them to play at their best. And so if I'm listening behind and watching and sort of figuring out, okay, where is the orchestra going? What's this collective body? Where is it heading? And then help us all get
To
in
the
that
same
direction,
place.
rather than saying, no, it needs to go here, not there, and then forcing everyone to kind of do that. So, and it depends on the conductor, it depends on the program, it depends on the audience sometimes, in terms of what kind of show we're trying to present. But I think that the thing about a concertmaster is to be adaptable and to assume the collective voice and project that, right? Whereas when you're playing a solo concert, like I will be here, of course, I do have a collaborator, a pianist who's going to perform with me as an equal, not as an accompanist. But basically, it's my vision and his vision and our vision together, but that's it.
You don't have to worry about anyone else.
Don't have to worry about anyone else. And sort of the pressure is now squarely on our shoulders to have the musical vision, the interpretation, the projection of the music, the communication of the composer to the audience through their notes that they write on the page. So it's plus, all the folk, what you play in an orchestra, whether it's a 25-piece orchestra or a 90-piece orchestra, the audience can spread their attention through
everybody,
all the players, right? When you're only one or two people on stage, you're it.
You.
You're it.
Yes. Yes.
So it's just a different level of presentation.
Yeah. Do you have a preference?
I'm more comfortable doing the orchestra thing just because it's what I do mostly. I've worked with a lot of chamber musicians who are used to sort of having that solo spotlight. And then, for example, I just played in a festival the last couple of weeks, and there were chamber musicians, and we formed a small string orchestra, and they were uncomfortable in the string orchestra because they were used to being alone on their part and not having to adjust
to everyone else. Good experience.
For me, obviously, being a concertmaster or playing an orchestra is what I'm most familiar with.
Yes. Yes.
But, in order to graduate from any university or college or music academy, it's a requirement to play at least one or two full-length, solo recital performances. And so it's not an activity that I'm not familiar with. It's just, it's not something that you do, and it's a privilege. It's a privilege to be asked to do this.
It's a privilege for us too.
Let's hope so.
Can you give us an idea what sort of program you're going to?
Right. Yeah. So knowing that this sort of this hall is fairly new, and that we're trying to, at least the impression I had was trying to introduce a little bit more of a classical tone, to the offerings here. I thought that it would be nice to present a varied program that had a lot of different styles of music that will appeal. Nothing on the program is inaccessible in terms of the difficulty or the complexity of the music. I'm going to open with good old Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, one of his late violin piano sonatas, which is an absolute delight. to listen to. It's full of beautiful melodies and lots of energy and a lot of humor. And the dialogue between the violin and the piano is constant, sometimes very friendly, sometimes a little more contentious. So there's a lot of fun interplay with that. Then I'm going to feature the violin as a solo instrument, and I'm going to tackle the mighty Bach chaconne, which is the
It's a wonderful piece.
final movement of his second partita for solo violin. And it's basically a theme in variations that lasts 15 minutes. And before everyone runs for the exits or says, oh, there's no way I can possibly sit through all that, you have to realize this is one of the most monumental works of classical music, period, not just for solo violin, because of the way he handles the basic opening material, and he keeps it interesting constantly. And there's room for all sorts of colors and all sorts of personalities and characters. And it's almost like the violinist is taking you on a journey through this piece, and you get highs and lows and extreme ecstasy and extreme anxiety and sort of difficulty. And it finishes very much like how it begins. So there's a feeling of full circle. Yeah. And it's a huge task for both the player and the audience, but the reward is nothing short of monumental. It's just fantastic. So that's the first half.
Yes.
And then I open the second half with a piece that hasn't been performed much. And it was commissioned by some friends of mine who are at Memorial University in St. John's, Newfoundland, called Duo Concertante. And they commissioned a whole bunch of Canadian composers and others to write violin piano works, contemporary works. And this composer, Don Avery, who's also quite a fine cellist, is from the Mohawk tribe. And I know that the Hamilton area has some territories that I think Mohawk tribes were living on or still living on today. And her piece is really about empowering Native women and the importance of their role in the culture. And I felt that it was quite an appropriate piece and timely as to what we're facing with Native people in the country. So I wanted to play that. And again, for a relatively contemporary piece, I think she wrote it 5 years ago, but it's very accessible.
Understandable.
And yeah, very understandable. And there's some surprises in it. We both, but mainly the pianist, Ben, speaks some Mohawk language during the piece, and we speak some at the very end. And it's just very, very provocative and evocative, and I think a powerful, quietly powerful piece of music.
And what are you thinking of?
And then the grand finale on their show is what used to be, I think, maybe overplayed for a long time, but is now really coming back into concert programs, and that is the César Franck Violin Sonata. And it's a tour de force mainly for the pianist, and Ben will definitely, that's partly why I put the chaconne on in the first half, is to give him a little bit of relief, because the Franck Sonata is a notoriously difficult piano part, and I know he's going to just play it amazingly well.
Exciting.
But it's a piece that it's got everything in it. There's a reason why it's so incredibly popular. It's extremely romantic. It has lovely melodies. It's got incredible drama in it. And it ends in a sort of a blazing blast of fireworks. And
beautiful.
So hopefully that will
be
a good ending.
I'm looking forward to that.
Thank you.
All right, one last question. Do you have a bucket list? Is there something that you've always wanted to play, or somewhere that you've always wanted to play that you haven't done yet?
It's not something I wake up and think about often, but a thought that's sort of come in and out of my head for many years is that I somewhere, sometime, it'd be nice to play all 10 Beethoven violin piano sonatas. I've played in performance, I think 7 of them. So there are 3 I've never played, and then some that I haven't played for many, many, many years. And there's Beethoven is kind of the guy that impresses me the most from in terms of composers. Not that I put him on a different level, but it's just when you see how revolutionary his music was. And I know that's the other thing is that we forget because we know it so well. We've heard these pieces. We've heard Beethoven Fifth, da 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 da. We've heard them so many times that they're not shocking. It's predictable.
But it was shocking.
But back then,
Yes.
people were going out of their minds when they listened to this music because it was just like, you can't do that. You can't do that. And yet it worked, and it was revolutionary. Better word.
So that's what we can expect next time.
Oh well, if someone wants to hear me play all 10 Beethoven sonatas,
That's something you'd like to do.
that would be something that I would consider, for sure.
Well, we're really looking forward to the 14th.
Thank you.
I'm so glad
So
that you
am I.
could be here.
Thank you.
So thank you very much for joining us.
Pleasure. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye. See you soon.